He thought turning her away would be routine, just another quiet refusal in a luxury lobby. But he had no idea he had just set something irreversible in motion. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The revolving doors of the Grand Crescent Hotel spun slowly as Emily Carter stepped inside, her soft footsteps barely audible against the polished marble floors that stretched endlessly beneath golden chandeliers. The air scented faintly with expensive cologne and fresh lilies arranged in towering vases, a world that seemed to whisper exclusivity without ever needing to say it aloud. And yet Emily walked forward with quiet composure, her simple navy cardigan draped neatly over her shoulders, her hair tied back in a low, practical knot, her small carry-on rolling gently behind her as if she belonged nowhere and everywhere at once, unnoticed by most, but quietly observing everything. The front desk glowing under warm light, where two receptionists stood perfectly poised in tailored uniforms, their smiles precise and rehearsed until the moment Emily approached and something shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough, just enough, for the warmth in their expressions to cool into. Something measured, something calculating, as the man behind the counter glanced down briefly at her shoes, then at the worn handle of her suitcase, then back to her face with a polite but distant smile. "Good evening. How may I assist you?" he asked, his tone smooth yet already carrying the weight of judgment before she had even spoken, and Emily, steady and calm, placed her ID gently on the marble surface. "I'd like a room for tonight, just one night," she said softly, her voice composed, almost gentle, as if she had made this request 1,000 times before and expected nothing more than a simple answer. But instead there was a pause, subtle but deliberate, the receptionist's fingers hovering over the keyboard without typing, his eyes flickering to his colleague, then back to the screen, and though no words had been spoken yet, the answer had already begun to take shape in the silence between them. Behind Emily, a couple dressed in tailored suits approached, their laughter light, their presence immediately acknowledged with bright smiles and swift service, keycards prepared within seconds, while Emily remained standing, still, patient, invisible in plain sight. And when the receptionist finally spoke again, his voice had shifted ever so slightly, polite on the surface but edged with quiet dismissal. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We're fully booked tonight," he said, even as another guest was handed a key just feet away. The contradiction hanging in the air like something no one wanted to acknowledge, a faint murmur rippling through nearby onlookers who had begun to notice, not the words, but the tone, the imbalance, the way the room subtly leaned away from her presence. And for a brief moment, Emily's eyes moved across the lobby, taking in the chandeliers, the marble, the people who had already decided who she was. Without a single question, and yet her expression did not change, no anger, no embarrassment, just a quiet understanding that settled over her like still water. And then, without raising her voice, without challenging the lie, she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, her fingers steady as she dialed, lifting it to her ear as she spoke in that same calm tone. "Hi. I think there's a problem here." And then she waited, not arguing, not leaving, simply standing there in the center of a room that had already dismissed her, while somewhere beyond those glass doors, something far more powerful had just been set into motion, though no one inside the Grand Crescent Hotel realized it yet. The receptionist held his smile, but it had become thinner now, stretched just enough to maintain professionalism, while something unspoken lingered beneath it, because Emily had not reacted the way most people did. She did not argue. She did not plead. She simply stood there, phone lowered at her side, her posture calm, almost patient. And that quiet confidence began to unsettle the rhythm of the lobby in ways no one could quite explain. A woman nearby paused mid-conversation. A bellhop slowed his steps. Even the second receptionist glanced over more than once as if trying to understand why this interaction had not ended already. And still, Emily remained, her gaze steady, not challenging, not submissive, simply present. as if she had every right to occupy that exact space despite everything around her suggesting otherwise. The man behind the counter cleared his throat softly, fingers tapping once against the marble before he leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice just enough to sound courteous but firm. "Ma'am, if there is nothing else I can assist you with, we do have other accommodations in the area that might better suit your needs." The words carefully chosen, polished, but unmistakable in their meaning, and for the first time, a faint shift passed through Emily's expression, not anger, not embarrassment, but recognition, as if she had heard this sentence before in different places, different voices, always dressed in politeness, yet carrying the same quiet dismissal. She nodded once, slowly, acknowledging him without agreeing, her fingers lightly brushing the handle of her suitcase, but she did not move. And that was when the atmosphere changed just enough for others to feel it. Not because of what she did, but because of what she did not do. She did not leave. She did not shrink. She simply waited, and waiting, in a place built on control and expectation, was something the staff did not know how to handle. A guest approached the desk behind her and hesitated, unsure whether to interrupt. The receptionist forced another smile and gestured for them to step forward. But his attention kept drifting back to Emily, to the quiet stillness that now seemed louder than any argument could have been. Minutes stretched longer than they should have. The ticking of a decorative clock behind the desk suddenly noticeable in the silence between conversations. And then, almost imperceptibly at first, a shift occurred near the entrance. The revolving door slowed, a subtle change in energy rippling inward as a doorman straightened his posture without being told. Another staff member glanced toward the entrance, and then quickly looked away, as if unsure whether to react. Emily did not turn immediately. She did not rush. She simply stood there, as if she already knew that whatever was coming had nothing to do with urgency and everything to do with timing. The receptionist noticed it too now, his voice faltering slightly as he attempted to resume normal service with the guest in front of him. But his words lost their rhythm, his confidence thinning with each passing second, because something invisible had entered the room before anyone could fully see it. And when Emily finally lifted her eyes toward the glass doors, there was no surprise in them, only quiet certainty, as if the moment unfolding had already been decided long before she ever stepped into that lobby. And behind her, the low murmur of voices began to fade, one by one, until the space that had once felt effortlessly exclusive now felt suspended, waiting, holding its breath for something it did not yet understand. The moment did not announce itself with noise. It arrived in silence, the kind that settles over a room when something shifts beyond explanation. And as the glass doors completed their slow rotation, a man stepped inside with measured precision, his presence neither rushed nor hesitant, simply certain, the tailored charcoal suit fitting him perfectly, the subtle gleam of his watch catching the chandelier light for just a second before fading again. But it was not the suit or the watch that changed the room. It was the way people reacted without realizing they were reacting at all. A concierge straightened instinctively. A bellhop stepped aside without being asked. And the receptionist who had just moments ago been so composed felt something unfamiliar press against his confidence. A hesitation he could not immediately explain, because recognition does not always come from knowing a face. Sometimes it comes from sensing authority before it is spoken, and the man's eyes moved once across the lobby, not scanning, not searching, but assessing, until they landed on Emily, standing exactly where she had been, calm, unmoved, as if she had been waiting not for rescue, but for confirmation. And when their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them, not dramatic, not emotional, just understood. The man adjusted his cuffs slightly before walking forward, each step quiet against the marble, yet somehow louder than anything that had happened in the last 10 minutes. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, a glass paused halfway to someone's lips, and by the time he reached the front desk, the air itself seemed to tighten. The receptionist straightened quickly, his practiced smile returning though it no longer felt as secure as it had moments before. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Grand Crescent. How may I assist you?" he said, his voice smooth but just a fraction too fast. And the man did not respond immediately, his gaze shifting briefly from the receptionist to Emily and back again, his expression controlled, unreadable. as if he were giving the room one last chance to correct itself before he spoke. And then, finally, in a tone so calm it carried more weight than any raised voice ever could, he asked, "Is there a reason my wife was just told she does not belong here?" The words landed without force, but the impact was immediate, visible. The receptionist blinked once, then twice, his posture stiffening as the meaning settled in, his eyes flicking back to Emily as if seeing her for the first time, truly seeing her, not as a passing inconvenience, not as someone out of place, but as someone connected to something he had not accounted for, something he should have recognized. The second receptionist froze completely, her hands still resting on the keyboard, as if afraid any movement might make things worse, and behind them, the quiet murmur that had filled the lobby disappeared entirely, replaced by a stillness so complete it felt almost staged, and yet nothing about it was planned. The man's gaze remained steady, not angry, not aggressive, just precise, waiting, and in that waiting, the receptionist felt the shift fully now, the imbalance of the situation turning in real time, the authority he had assumed just minutes earlier slipping through his grasp without a single raised voice or confrontation. His throat tightened slightly as he forced a small, uncertain laugh. "There must be some misunderstanding, sir. We were simply at capacity," he said, the words weaker than before, lacking the certainty they had carried earlier. And for the first time since Emily had walked in, the explanation sounded exactly like what it was, an excuse, and the man's expression did not change, but his silence stretched just long enough to make the truth settle in the space between them, undeniable, irreversible. And somewhere deep in that silence, the realization began to form, not just in the receptionist, but in everyone watching, that whatever happened next would not be something this hotel could simply smooth over or forget. The silence did not break. It deepened, stretching across the marble floor and climbing the walls like something alive, and the receptionist felt it pressing against him now, heavier than any accusation, because the man standing before him had not raised his voice, had not demanded anything. And yet everything in the room had already begun to shift in his favor, the kind of shift that could not be undone with polite words or practiced smiles. His fingers hovered above the keyboard again, as if searching for something to anchor himself to. But nothing came, because this was no longer about availability. It was about judgment, and everyone in the lobby could feel it, even if no one dared to speak it aloud. The man's gaze moved once more, slow and deliberate, taking in the desk, the uniforms, the polished surface that reflected the faint tension in every face. And then he reached into his jacket, not abruptly, not dramatically, but with the same measured calm that had defined his every movement, retrieving a slim phone that seemed almost insignificant in his hand until he placed it gently on the marble counter, the soft sound echoing louder than expected in the quiet, his eyes never leaving the receptionist as he spoke again. "Let us be precise," he said, his voice even, controlled. "My wife asked for a room, and you decided she did not qualify." There was no accusation in his tone, only clarity, and somehow that made it worse, because it stripped away any illusion the receptionist could hide behind. The second receptionist shifted slightly, her breath catching as if she wanted to intervene, but did not know how, and behind them, a manager who had been observing from a distance finally stepped forward, his expression composed, but his steps just a fraction too quick. "Sir, I am the front office manager. There must have been a misunderstanding. We would be more than happy to accommodate your wife immediately," he said, his voice smooth, practiced, already moving to repair what had been broken. But the man did not look at him right away. He allowed the offer to hang in the air for a moment, long enough for everyone to realize that this was not about fixing a booking. It was about something much deeper, something that could not be corrected with a complimentary suite or a polite apology. And when he finally turned his attention to the manager, his expression remained unchanged, calm, composed, but unmistakably firm. "A room is not the issue," he said quietly, and those few words seemed to land heavier than anything else he had spoken, because in that moment, the entire situation reframed itself, no longer a service error, no longer a misunderstanding, but a decision that had already revealed more than the staff could take back. The manager hesitated, his confidence faltering just enough to be seen. "Of course, sir. "We value all of our guests," he began. But the sentence did not finish with the same strength it started, because even he could hear how hollow it sounded now, how late it was, and Emily, who had remained silent through all of it, finally shifted her weight slightly, not stepping forward, not stepping back, just enough movement to remind everyone she was still there, still the center of everything that had unfolded, her presence no longer invisible, no longer overlooked, but undeniable. And the man reached for his phone again, lifting it with deliberate ease as if the next step had already been decided long before anyone in that lobby realized what was happening, his thumb moving once across the screen before he brought it to his ear. And when he spoke, his voice did not change, it remained calm, controlled, almost conversational. "Yes," he said. "I am at the Grand Crescent. I need you to review every active operation here, effective immediately." A pause, brief but absolute. And then, without raising his voice, without looking away, he added, "No, do not wait. Begin now." And the room went completely still, because in that moment, everyone understood that this was no longer about a single denied room. This was something far larger, something that was already unfolding beyond the walls they stood in, something that could not be stopped. And for the first time since Emily had walked through those doors, the power in the room had shifted entirely, leaving behind nothing but the quiet, irreversible realization of what had just been set in motion. The call ended as quietly as it had begun. No dramatic gesture, no raised voice, just a simple lowering of the phone back onto the marble surface. And yet the effect rippled outward instantly, invisible but undeniable, because within seconds, subtle changes began to unfold across the lobby. A security supervisor near the entrance pressed his earpiece with a sudden look of alertness. The concierge's tablet lit up with a notification that drew his full attention, and somewhere behind the front desk, a printer began to hum unexpectedly, spitting out pages no one had requested. The manager noticed it first, his eyes narrowing slightly as he glanced toward the back office, then back to the man standing before him. The calm realization settling in that whatever had just been initiated was already moving through systems he did not control. His smile returned, but this time it was different, tighter, edged with urgency. "Sir, we truly apologize for any inconvenience. Please allow us to make this right. We can offer our presidential suite, complimentary, along with full amenities," he said quickly, his voice polished but carrying the faint strain of someone trying to regain control slipping through his fingers. But the man did not respond immediately. Instead, he turned slightly toward Emily, his expression softening just enough to acknowledge her. A quiet check, a silent question, and Emily met his gaze with the same calm steadiness she had carried from the moment she walked in. There was no triumph in her eyes, no desire for retaliation, just a quiet acceptance of what had already been revealed. She gave the smallest shake of her head, almost imperceptible, but enough. And when the man turned back to the manager, the decision had already been made. "You had the opportunity to make it right when she first walked in," he said, his voice still even, still controlled, but now carrying something final, something that closed the door on every polite offer that came too late. The receptionist swallowed hard, his hands no longer steady as he adjusted the computer screen, as if numbers and reservations could somehow undo what had already been set in motion. But they could not, because now the consequences were beginning to surface in ways no one had anticipated. A phone behind the desk rang sharply. The second receptionist hesitated before picking it up, her expression shifting almost immediately as she listened, her eyes widening slightly before she covered the receiver, whispering urgently to the manager, who turned pale for just a fraction of a second before composing himself again. "We are receiving instructions from corporate," she murmured, her voice barely audible. And that was when the weight of the situation fully settled in, not just for the staff, but for the guests who had been watching from a distance, because the power in the room had moved beyond appearances, beyond assumptions, into something structural, something real. The manager straightened his tie, attempting one final time to reassert control, stepping forward with a more formal tone. "Sir, perhaps we can discuss this privately in my office," he offered. But the man did not move. He remained exactly where he was, in the open, in full view of everyone, as if transparency itself was part of the lesson unfolding. "There is nothing private about how your staff treated my wife," he replied calmly. And those words landed with quiet precision, leaving no room for negotiation, no space for quiet correction. Behind closed doors, and in that moment, the lobby, once filled with effortless luxury and quiet confidence, felt different. The marble floors no longer reflected prestige, but something far more fragile, something exposed. And as another notification chimed from the concierge's device, followed by the sudden appearance of a senior operations director entering hurriedly through the side corridor, breath controlled but urgency unmistakable, it became clear to everyone present that this was no longer a contained incident. It was a chain reaction, unfolding in real time. And at the center of it all, Emily stood exactly as she had from the beginning, quiet, composed, her presence no longer overlooked but understood, as the room collectively realized that respect, once withheld, had a cost far greater than anyone there had been prepared to pay. The shift was no longer subtle. It was visible now, undeniable, as the senior operations director moved quickly across the marble floor, his usual composed demeanor replaced by a tight urgency that did not belong in a place designed to feel effortless, his eyes locking onto the man at the center of it all before flicking briefly to Emily. And in that instant, recognition fully settled in, not just of who they were, but of what had already been set in motion beyond the walls of the lobby. "Sir," he said, his voice controlled but noticeably lower, as if aware that every word carried weight now. "We have just received directives from corporate headquarters." The manager beside him stiffened, his carefully maintained authority slipping further as he realized the situation had escalated beyond his reach, beyond his authority, beyond anything he could correct with polished apologies or upgraded rooms. The receptionist stood frozen, his earlier confidence completely gone, replaced by the quiet dread of understanding consequences too late. And the director continued, choosing each word with precision. "All active bookings are being reviewed. All incoming reservations have been suspended, and operations are being temporarily halted pending a full internal assessment." The words fell into the room like something heavy and final, and for a moment, no one moved, because the reality of what that meant began to unfold slowly, methodically, like a realization no one wanted but could not deny. Guests exchanged confused glances. A couple near the elevators lowered their voices. A bellhop stood still with a luggage cart he no longer knew where to take. And at the center of it all, Emily remained exactly as she had been, calm, steady, her presence now grounding rather than overlooked, as if the chaos around her only highlighted the quiet strength she had carried from the beginning. The manager stepped forward again, but this time there was no performance left, no polished script to rely on, only the raw edge of someone trying to salvage something already slipping away. "This is highly unusual. There must be a way to resolve this immediately," he said, though even he could hear the uncertainty in his own voice. And the man did not interrupt him. He allowed the words to finish, allowed the weight of them to settle, before responding with the same calm clarity that had defined every moment since his arrival. "There is a way," he said, his tone even. "It begins with understanding that service is not about appearances, and respect is not optional." And there was no anger in his voice, no need for it, because the outcome had already spoken louder than any confrontation could have. The director nodded slightly, absorbing the message not just as instruction, but as consequence, turning to the staff with a look that carried both authority and quiet accountability. And somewhere behind the desk, another system alert sounded, followed by a series of confirmations that rippled through devices, screens, and whispered conversations, each one reinforcing what was already clear. This was no longer a moment. It was a turning point. The receptionist lowered his gaze, the weight of his earlier decision settling heavily now, not because he had broken a rule, but because he had revealed something far more costly, a judgment that could not be undone. And Emily, after everything, finally reached for her suitcase handle, not to leave in defeat, but simply to move forward, her steps as quiet as they had been when she first entered. But now every eye followed her, not with judgment, but with something entirely different, something closer to understanding. And as she passed the front desk, she paused for just a brief second, her eyes meeting the receptionist's, not with anger, not with superiority, but with a calm that spoke louder than any words could have, before continuing toward the doors and behind her. The once flawless rhythm of the Grand Crescent Hotel had been broken, not by force, not by noise, but by a single moment of quiet disrespect that had revealed exactly what the entire place stood to lose. The glass doors opened again, but this time they did not command attention. They simply allowed Emily to step forward into the cool evening air, her movement quiet, steady, as if nothing inside had shaken her, and yet behind her, the entire structure of certainty within the Grand Crescent had already begun to fracture. The manager remained where he stood, no longer attempting to intervene, no longer offering solutions, because there was nothing left to offer that could reverse what had already unfolded. The senior operations director turned toward his tablet, issuing low, precise instructions to teams that were now moving beyond the building itself, his voice controlled but urgent. As confirmations continued to arrive in rapid succession, system audits initiated, service lines paused, executive alerts triggered, each one a reminder that the decision made at the front desk had traveled far beyond a single interaction, and the receptionist, still behind the counter, stared at the marble surface as if trying to find the exact moment everything had shifted. But it had not been a single moment. It had been a series of small choices, a glance, a tone, a quiet assumption that had built into something irreversible, his reflection faintly visible beneath the polished surface, no longer confident, no longer certain, just still. As the reality settled in that what he thought was routine had never been routine at all. Outside, Emily paused near the curb, the soft hum of city traffic replacing the silence of the lobby, the streetlights casting a warm glow across the pavement. And for the first time since she had entered the hotel, she allowed herself a small breath, not relief, not triumph, just a release of the tension that had never shown on her face. Moments later, the man stepped out beside her, his presence just as composed as before, the chaos behind them not reflected in his expression, only a quiet attentiveness as he looked at her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softer now, stripped of the authority it had carried inside, and Emily gave a small nod, her lips forming the faintest smile. "I am," she replied simply, and there was something in that simplicity that carried more weight than anything that had happened inside, because it was not about what they had done. It was about what had been revealed. The man glanced back once toward the towering facade of the hotel, its lights still glowing, its exterior unchanged, but everything inside had already begun to shift, systems paused, reputations questioned, decisions reviewed, all from a moment that could have been handled differently. And as a black sedan pulled up smoothly to the curb, its engine barely audible, the driver stepping out to open the rear door, the contrast between quiet simplicity and unmistakable presence became clear without a single word needing to explain it. Emily placed her suitcase inside, her movements as calm as they had been all evening, and before stepping in, she turned slightly, her gaze drifting back toward the entrance, not with resentment, not with satisfaction, but with something closer to reflection, as if she were leaving behind not just a place, but a lesson that would continue unfolding long after she was gone. Inside, the staff moved quickly now, voices low but urgent, systems being checked, calls being made, each action a response to something they could no longer control. And the receptionist finally lifted his eyes, watching through the glass as Emily entered the car, the door closing softly behind her, the vehicle pulling away without haste, without spectacle, just a quiet departure that carried more consequence than any dramatic exit ever could. And as the taillights faded into the distance, the weight of the evening remained, settling into the marble floors, the polished counters, the carefully curated image of a place that had always believed it understood value, until it realized, too late, that value had been standing right in front of it all along. Inside the Grand Crescent, the illusion of control had fully dissolved, replaced by a quiet, methodical unraveling that no one could stop. The lobby still looked the same to an outsider, the chandeliers still glowing, the marble floors still polished to perfection. But beneath that surface, everything had shifted. The senior operations director moved with sharp efficiency now, his earlier composure replaced by decisive action as he coordinated calls with headquarters, his voice low but firm, confirming directives that left no room for interpretation. Departments were being flagged, accounts reviewed, internal reports pulled in real time, and every staff member could feel it. The invisible system that once supported their authority, now scrutinizing it instead. The manager stood near the desk, his hands clasped tightly behind his back, no longer giving orders, only receiving them. His earlier confidence reduced to silence as he listened to instructions that made it clear this situation had escalated far beyond a single incident. Full compliance is required immediately, the director said into his device, his tone leaving no room for delay, and nearby, the receptionist remained in place, unmoving, as if stepping away would somehow confirm the reality he was trying to process, his mind replaying the interaction again and again, searching for a moment he could change, a word he could take back. But there was none, because the problem had never been one sentence, it had been the assumption behind it. And now that assumption had consequences that extended far beyond him. A colleague approached quietly, placing a hand near the desk, as if to offer support, but no words came, because nothing felt sufficient in the face of what was unfolding. Guests began to move more quickly now, some checking their phones as notifications reached them, others approaching the desk with questions that no one could answer clearly. The seamless experience the hotel prided itself on had fractured into uncertainty, and every unanswered question only deepened the realization that something fundamental had been exposed. Upstairs, lights flickered on in administrative offices that were rarely active at this hour, executives dialing in remotely, reviewing reports, tracing the sequence of events that had led to this moment, each detail confirming the same truth. This was not about policy. It was about judgment, and judgment, once revealed, could not be concealed again. The manager finally exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering just slightly as the weight settled in fully. He turned to the receptionist, not with anger, not with blame, but with a quiet understanding that this was bigger than one person, bigger than one decision, and yet still rooted in a single moment that had changed everything. "We will cooperate fully," he said, though his voice carried a heaviness that had not been there before. And across the lobby, the once effortless rhythm of luxury had been replaced by something far more fragile, something honest, because for the first time, the system was not protecting its image, it was examining it. And outside, far from the marble floors and controlled lighting, the city continued as it always had, unaware of the shift that had taken place inside those walls. But for everyone within them, the lesson was already clear, not spoken, not announced, but felt in every quiet movement and every uncertain glance, that respect is not defined by who walks through the door, but by how they are treated when they do. And once that truth is broken, no amount of perfection can restore what has been lost. By the following morning, the Grand Crescent no longer felt like the same place. The chandeliers still hung in perfect symmetry. The marble floors still reflected every movement with flawless precision. But the atmosphere had changed in a way no design could conceal. The quiet confidence that once defined the space had been replaced with something more cautious, more aware. As if every staff member now understood that the smallest interaction could carry consequences far beyond what anyone could see in the moment. The senior operations director stood near the front desk reviewing final reports, his expression steady but thoughtful, while corporate executives had already issued formal directives, new policies, mandatory retraining, and a complete restructuring of guest relations protocols, not as punishment, but as correction. Because what had happened was not an error in procedure. It was an error in judgment, and judgment could not be repaired with surface-level solutions. The manager moved through the lobby slowly, greeting guests with a renewed attentiveness that was no longer performative, but deliberate, as if each word now carried weight he had not fully understood before. And behind the desk, the receptionist stood once again in his position, but everything about him had changed, his posture more careful, his tone more considered, his eyes meeting each guest with a level of awareness that had not been there before, because now he knew that every person who approached that counter carried a story he could not see, a value he could not measure, and a dignity that did not depend on appearance. And that understanding, though it came at a cost, had settled into him with a permanence that would not fade. Outside, the city moved forward as it always did, unaware of the transformation that had taken place within those walls. But for those who had witnessed it, the lesson remained clear, not spoken, not announced, but embedded in every quiet decision that followed. And miles away, in the back seat of a moving car, Emily Carter looked out the window as the morning light stretched across the skyline, her reflection faint in the glass, calm, composed, unchanged by everything that had happened, because for her, this was never about proving anything. It was simply about being treated with the same respect she gave to others. And beside her, Daniel sat quietly, his presence steady, not triumphant, not reflective, just certain, because he had not acted out of anger, but out of principle, a line that had been crossed and a standard that had to be upheld. And as the car continued down the road, leaving the hotel and its lessons behind, the story did not end with consequences or corrections. It ended with something far simpler, something far more enduring, the understanding that dignity does not announce itself. It reveals itself in moments when no one expects it. And those who recognize it will always stand apart from those who overlook it. Respect is always revealed when you least expect it. If you believe in stories that uncover truth and dignity, hit like and subscribe because the next story might change the way you see the world. Thank you for watching.